It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce Moscow's ability to fund its war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. Lower gas flows have left European countries struggling to refill storage tanks for winter and could lead to energy rationing. A memorial service for Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union's last ever leader, has taken place in Moscow. President Putin denied him full state honours and said he was too busy to attend. His coffin went on display in the Hall of Columns, where previous Soviet leaders have been mourned. The politician was laid to rest alongside his wife at a Moscow cemetery. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. Grant Shapps says the next PM may decide to keep the scheme running if it's popular.
That will be up to them how they prioritise funding. And I think, to be fair, they'll want to see how this actually works. Does it attract people to the buses? Does the simplicity of knowing that you'll never pay more than £2 for your bus fare for a single journey help attract people back to the buses? I think it will. But it will be great to be able to collect the data and then for decisions to be made from there. In the meantime, people know headed into the winter that this is a bit of real cost of living help.
Staying with transport, and Avanti West Coast's managing director has stepped down following a backlash over timetable cuts. The rail firm says Phil Whittingham will leave on the 15th of September. That's the same day that new train strikes will take place. The company currently operates a significantly reduced service due to staffing issues, with only one train an hour between London and Manchester. Police are investigating how protesters were able to gain access to the House of Commons chamber yesterday. Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves around the Speaker's chair. They draped banners on the Palace of Westminster and padlocked themselves by the neck to railings. 8 people were arrested during the security breach. Leader of the House, Mark Spencer, says protests like this actually harm democracy.
These types of protests in these locations will put further barriers between our constituents and the MPs, and I think that's unhealthy for our democracy, and it's unhelpful to MPs.
HMS Prince of Wales will be making its way to Portsmouth Naval Base today following a mechanical fault. The journey will be slow, as it will be using just one propeller. It will then remain at port while further inspections are carried out. HMS Queen Elizabeth will be taking over its US duties. The energy crisis is forcing manufacturers to consider cutting production or closing down altogether, according to new research. Trade association Make UK, which represents manufacturers, says half of firms surveyed have seen their electricity bills shoot up by more than 100% in the past 12 months. Around 1 in 8 have already made job cuts as a result of increased energy bills. Over 1.6 million care home residents, staff and housebound people in England can receive their autumn coronavirus vaccine booster from Monday. NHS England says health teams will visit care homes and private residences in the latest phase of the vaccine rollout. It will then be expanded to involve 26 million people over the coming weeks, including the over 50s. Thousands of new emergency beds will be given to shelters as part of a government scheme to end rough sleeping in England. The 3-year plan, costing £2 billion, will see 14,000 new beds introduced over the next 3 years. Over 2,000 supported homes for those with the most complex needs will also be delivered by March 2025. The International Atomic Energy Agency says the damage that's been done to Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is unacceptable. It's currently inspecting the facility, which has been under the control of Russian forces since March. 2 members of the watchdog will stay there long term, with a full safety report to be published early next week. NASA will try to launch its latest moon rocket again today following a failed attempt earlier this week. The initial launch had to be postponed due to a temperature problem in one of the engines. They're now expecting Artemis 1 to lift off at around 7:15 p.m. UK time from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Serena Williams has bid an emotional farewell to tennis after her third-round loss at the US Open. Tributes began pouring in for the 40-year-old following her defeat. Michelle Obama praised her as one of the greatest athletes of all time. And one lucky UK ticket holder has won the £110 million jackpot in last night's EuroMillions draw. Only 15 UK players have ever won a jackpot of more than 100 million. The National Lottery says they generate over 30 million every week for causes across the UK. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks. Whoever wins the Conservative leadership contest in the Keys to Number 10 will face a chilling and pressing agenda: how to help people through the cost of living crisis, not least the imminent and catastrophic rises in energy costs, and NHS increasingly showing that it's not fit for purpose, even with transfers of vast amounts of money. Growing public concern about the numbers of people crossing the Channel and the government's apparent inability to do anything about it. And so it goes on. But, as the great political strategist James Carville famously said to Bill Clinton back in the 90s, it's the economy, stupid. Without a vibrant economy, creating wealth, producing jobs and paying wages and taxes, we might as well whistle our way to banana republic status. With the G7 capping Russian energy prices and Putin switching off the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline, it just got even worse overnight. So, when the British Chamber of Commerce says businesses, and I quote, will close their doors this winter if they are not given support with soaring energy bills, Houston, we have a problem. The small and medium-sized businesses of this country are among our most flexible, innovative and productive. The big multinational PLCs are a bit like oil tankers. They take a lot longer to slow, turn and accelerate. SMEs are more fleet of foot, but they are also here today and gone tomorrow if we don't cherish them. And if they do go, well, we are in deep doo-doo. You get my drift. Beyond your frightening energy bills and those faced by business, the biggest nightmare on the horizon is a recession. If it all grinds to a halt, those in work suffer, even if they stay in work and aren't laid off. Those hoping for bailouts suffer, because those that create the surplus cash and pay those taxes to fund those bailouts will be gone. Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, CBE, is president of the British Chamber of Commerce, and she said that she did not believe that government support would prevent a recession, but added that the measures would help reduce the impact of a shrinking economy. And I'm delighted to say that she joins me live. Also listening to that conversation here on my left, live in the studio, Hamish McRae, my favourite political economist, is here, and one of the sharpest political brains in the game, Freddie Gray, deputy editor of The Spectator. And as always, we want to hear what you think. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk with any comments that you have on the stories that we're covering, but particularly that top one. We're also on Twitter, as indeed am I, and on Facebook. And I'm genuinely delighted to start with the President of the British Chambers of Commerce, Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, CBE. Very good of you to find time for us this afternoon. First things first, you're a businesswoman of years of experience as well as the President of the Chamber. What is your personal take on the scale of the problem your sector faces?
The scale of the problem today is as big as it was during COVID. And I am deeply concerned about the lack of a plan for business to get us through what is going to be the worst winter any of us can remember.
And the SME sector, to be crystal clear, I mean, you used to run a big PLC, you know how the whole of British industry works, but with the SME sector particularly, they have less deep pockets, they have fewer reserves. The timescale could be really quite tight.
The timescale's a real challenge. We found during COVID that most businesses in the UK who are very, very small have less than 3 months of cash flow. Now, if you take a look at the costs coming through on energy hikes between now and March, it will put many of them out of business. So many are talking about closing their doors already. Most are saying it is their biggest cost pressure. They have no choice but to ask for more support. And we don't want more support normally. Business wants to be able to go off and grow and invest and be brilliant. But with this level of cost pressure, it's absolutely impossible to do.
You're not a woman who makes idle threats and comes on telly just to blurt out gloomy predictions. What scale of closures are you talking about? What proportion of your sector could go to the wall this winter or early spring?
When we've been talking to many of our members across many sectors, many are affected. We already know, and other business groups have talked about pubs alone, where 2/3 could close. But you could see any organisation with incredibly high energy bills having to close for at least part or all of winter just to be able to cope with the cost pressures coming through. Now, we mustn't forget that they've already been through COVID. Many already have COVID loans. They didn't all get the support that everyone would have hoped they'd have got. They've also got to deal with the horrendous cost of inflation right now, which is running at double digits, and that is going to continue. With those pressures, we will see many be forced to close without support.
The Hamlet without the prince will be resolved on Monday. Is the offer coming from either Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, or Liz Truss, the current Foreign Secretary and favourite to win? Are either of those packages filling you with more hope or less hope?
There's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of talk, but I haven't seen a plan. We need a plan of action. We need to know by Tuesday evening how much money is going to be available to SMEs to help them through this winter period. I don't think we can have any more rhetoric, any more chat, any more, look, we know it's really difficult and businesses need to cope. We need to know what the plan of action is now, and not just for the short term, because while all this goes on as well, we've got to focus really heavily for business as to how we, the UK, have energy independence over the coming years, and what investments are really going to be made to ensure that can happen as well. Because as much as we want short-term support, we need to know that there's going to be a long-term answer to this.
You're a Tory. You take the Tory whip in the House of Lords, and Tories, as I understand it, having been around a wee while, don't like big borrowing, don't instinctively like bailouts. Are you looking at a set of circumstances now that are so worrying and so different that all of that goes to the wall? What Liz Truss talks about, rejecting the Treasury orthodoxy, you got to take a deep breath and do stuff that might sound a bit more like your opposition.
We are going to have no choice. This is the scale of challenge of costs is as much as COVID for many SMEs. So I don't see how normal Treasury orthodox policies work in this environment. And I don't want to be asking for this. I want us all to be able to go back to normality as we knew it pre-pandemic, but none of us have the joy of that. So absolutely, we need additional measures to be taken now.
Final point, again, just repeating the fact that you are a Conservative Party member and you take the whip in the House of Lords. So you're in there, you talk to these people day in, day out. Do you have a sense that that level of concern that you've just articulated is grasped either by Sunak or Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng or any of the leading lights who are likely to be in government come Monday, Tuesday?
They are all completely aware of the scale of the challenge, and that's why we expect to see a plan early next week. You
said Monday evening. That's 12 hours after whoever is the winner. I like that. A woman who knows what she wants and knows exactly when she wants it. Ruby, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for breaking into your weekend to chat to us here on GB News. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. The president there of the British Chambers of Commerce, Conservative life peer Baroness Ruby McGregor Smith. Sitting next to me, and I think it's fair to say, glued to that conversation are, as I say, Freddie Gray. Well, I thought we were on a wide shot there. Anyway, Freddie's on my immediate left here. He's the deputy editor of The Spectator. And sitting at the end of the sofa is the principal economic commentator for The Independent, columnist for The Mail, my good friend Hamish McRae. Both good friends. Wow.
Well, it's gloomy, isn't it? The outlook is not good.
But this is not a person who trades in gloom-mongering, scaremongering. It's a grown-up, active politician who's run big businesses.
Well, and energy is the big thing, particularly for SMEs. I mean, we're hearing the percentages are sort of terrifying. It gets to the stage now where you're reading reports and you see a 250% electricity increase and you think, oh, that's not too bad, I've heard worse. You know, and it's important to emphasise, though, this isn't just a British phenomenon. This is happening across Europe. I mean, Spain is suffering terribly at the moment. I read today that the cost of making a ceramic tile has gone up 1,000%. So think about that next time you want to redo your bathroom.
Yeah. Or heating a chicken shed to get eggs for your breakfast has gone up by a similar amount. Put your economist hat on before you put your politics hat on. Is she overstating it, or is she on the money?
I thought she put it extremely well. If you're a huge business, you can probably have a strong balance sheet. You can sort of see your way through. If you're a small one, it's very, very tough. So I think this is very serious. It's absolutely right. That is why there will be a big package it's come on Monday night. I hope not Monday night. Let's just give it a week or two to think it through and do something that's going to be effective. But it's the same everywhere. We just have to do it rather better than we have in the past, and rather better, perhaps, than other countries.
Yeah. Freddie, do you think that... we all know what the betting shops are saying and what the odds and the pollsters are saying, but let's still trade on the basis that we don't know the actual outcome until midday on Monday. But do you, as a political observer, think that either Camp Truss or Camp Sunak are up to dealing with what Ruby just described, and Hamish said, and I quote, absolutely on the money?
Well, I think it's good to put that proviso in, because I think we're all assuming Liz Truss is going to win. But I spoke to a former minister yesterday, admittedly a Sunak supporter, who said he thinks it's going to be a lot closer than people think. So, there could be a shock, but I'd say it's probably about 40-1 or something. But as for having a plan, the market seem to prefer Sunak. The market seem a little bit more jittery about Liz Truss, I think that's fair to say. But, we'll see. I think, Monday night she should have a strong proposal. She should have an immediate set of measures to tackle the energy crisis and the inflationary crisis, and not just... I'm going to cut taxes.
And Hamish, is the nature of the thing such that Truss's point about challenging the Treasury orthodoxy and, in effect, ripping up the way things were done for decades, is that sound? It seems to me it's OK to challenge the orthodoxy, but if you throw all of the economic textbooks out of the window, you've got a problem.
No, absolutely. And the Treasury is hugely powerful and therefore always gets beaten up. And in a way, I'm all for beating them up. But it isn't just the Treasury. It is the global markets you have to worry about. You see what happened to sterling last week. Off now just a bit above against the dollar, 115. A couple of weeks ago it was 120. 3 or 4 months ago it was 140. So this is not good.
Do you think we could go below the dollar? Is that
no, I don't. No. A lot of people are saying it'll be parity or test the lowest ever in 85 of, 105. I don't buy that. I really don't buy that. But I do worry about it. She needs to get the markets on side. And it needs, therefore, a sensible, measured plan. We're letting the deficit go up now, but we will keep our long-term plan to keep it down.
And I only interrupt to be clear, but because we all follow this stuff very closely, but folk who may be kind enough to be listening to our conversation on radio or on watching it on telly, just to underline that point you made, a weak pound can be even more damaging to inflation than a big pay settlement in the private sector or the public sector.
Well, absolutely, because we import a lot of stuff.
Yeah, not least energy.
I can give you a number. If the pound were against the dollar where it was in January, petrol at the pumps would be 150, it wouldn't be 175 or whatever it is. So it absolutely directly affects the cost of living.
Do you take those cautionary notes as well about the next phase, i.e., as Ruby said, if whoever comes in doesn't get it right, we are looking at a recession down the barrel?
I think we are, and I think there are some sort of more kind of hawkish, more sort of libertarian, if you like, neoliberal, if you like, people who are excited about what trusts might do. I mean, I think they think that sort of shock therapy to the British economy for growth is exactly what's needed. The worry is that the shock therapy might also kill the patient, because we have such a sclerotic state now. And since COVID, the economy is so scrambled in so many ways that we don't quite know what the impact of these measures will be. I think Truss makes a fairly good point, actually. I think she's criticised as being sort of economically illiterate. I'm not one to judge on that. Hamish is. But I think she makes a good point that growth it doesn't matter if you run deficits hot a bit if you make the fundamentals of the economy sounder, and that a lower tax environment will do that.
Yeah. Hamish?
I think we might squeak by without recession. I think what's more likely, if energy prices do come down for whatever reason early next year, inflation comes down, all the numbers suddenly start to look quite a lot better. But I think it's going to be touch and go. I think that we may well have a recession. I don't think it's going to be like the recessions that some of us remember, of the 1990s and so on, where you suddenly have not just high inflation, but you have unemployment shooting up to. I don't think it's going to be like that. But I think that it's going to be more likely a year or two of really grungy growth with a lot of scrambling of business level and individual level. And what worries me is not the R word, recession, but what worries me is that there's a loss of global confidence in UK Inc. I don't think it's justified. It worries me it might happen.
And politically, if you're inching to, the Express today is saying maybe an election next year, most of the money is probably on 24, even early 25, going the whole full 5-year term. But you don't win elections if you're sitting on the back of, if not a full-blown recession, a real caustic slowdown.
If it's Liz Truss, she's going to face a very difficult decision. If she wants to call an earlier election, she'll probably lose it. But the problem is, the winter is supposed to be so bad. The longer-term horizon's looking gloomy too.
Because no honeymoon period's going to get you from 30% in the polls up to 45.
Well, we were just talking about this. I think Liz Truss may have, again, assuming it's her, may have a very short but rather intense honeymoon period. And I think this is something peculiar in the British character, that we sort of form an ironic attachment to people who are seen to be hopeless or everybody thinks is wooden or awkward. Theresa May had it. Jeremy Corbyn had it to a certain extent. There's a sort of fondness for people that are seen to be a bit crap. And I think, that's being unfair on her, because I don't think she's necessarily...
Well, except to say there's a 2-page spread in the Daily Mail today saying she's always been underestimated.
She's always been underestimated,
from one of her great supporters.
Being underestimated is her great asset, I think. The expectations around her are so low, particularly on the financial side, I think, that she might do better than expected to begin with, I think.
Yeah. Let's finish. We've got about... No, go on, Henry.
Well, just following that through. This is not my field, but my instinct is the British people just don't want another election. Please, let's just get them on. See if see if she's any good. See if the cabinet's any good. Wait until we get much closer to the time, and then they'll make their rational minds up.
And as an awful lot of people, independent commentators observe, the British public may slightly favour Labour at the moment, but they certainly haven't fallen in love with Sir Keir Starmer yet to make it a slam dunk. Final point, I'm being told in my ear we've got about a minute and a half left, but you've both kindly agreed to come back at 1 o'clock when we're also joined by Peter Lilly, Lord Lilly, and Caroline Dinage, which I'm absolutely thrilled about, a former MP and a current MP. I wanted to finish on this point because we do try and be a little optimistic, and the lovely Julian Jessup, who often comes on the programme, and Hamish, you particularly know him well, I think you're familiar with him as well. He's been tweeting in the last 24 hours, globally energy prices are just showing some slippage, and the long-term markets, which we've all three of us talked about, are suggesting that maybe we've passed the worst, and so input prices may just be coming down. Is that genuinely hopeful, or is that over-optimistic? Hamish?
Well, the oil price has come down, so sure. But I don't think we're going to see a significant evidence that we're past the peak of inflation for another 3 months or so.
Yeah. Freddie?
Well, I think, if energy prices do come down, as they seem to be doing, that makes Putin's brinkmanship far more aggressive. Because, as we've seen today, he will turn off the tap entirely if he has to, citing spurious reasons for doing it all the same. But we are still, as everybody knows, far too reliant on Russian natural resources. And until we get over that problem, we're going to be stuck in this situation for a while.
And all of the dramatic stuff from Boris Johnson about Sizewell and nuclears and this, that and the other, none of that helps tomorrow.
Too long term. And Liz Truss talking about fracking, again, not quick enough. We need faster solutions and we don't seem to have them.
And allowing localism to be a brake on it. So if you don't want it, you don't have to have it.
Well, that would work, and I think some people do want it, so it would work.
Yeah,
people would.
Fascinating. For the time being, as I say, I repeat, because you won't want to miss it, folks at home, both Hamish and Freddie will be back with us at 1 o'clock, once you've had a coffee and stretched the old legs and joined by some other guests. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed for your comments and for your commentary. Thank you, gents. Freddie Gray, Deputy Editor of The Spectator, and, of course, don't miss his podcast Americano, and also the Principal Economic Commentator for The Independent and columnist for The Mail, Hamish McRae. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and my excellent, brilliant friends. Lots more coming up on the programme. After 186 years, Bristol Zoo has closed its doors in Clifton and will be moving to a site in South Gloucestershire called the Wild Place Project. We'll have all of the details next, but first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be rather cloudy with heavy rain in the west and showers in the east. Here are the details. A dry afternoon for north-east Scotland with sunny spells, though bands of heavy rain will slowly spread north-eastwards this afternoon. A windy day, especially for exposed coasts in the north. A mostly wet and windy afternoon across Northern Ireland with outbreaks of heavy rain pushing north-eastwards, though these will be followed by heavy showers. Northern England will see a mixture of some heavy showers that could be thundery at times and a few sunny spells this afternoon, feeling warm. Across Wales, a mainly dry afternoon in the east with the odd bright or sunny spell. In the west, there'll be outbreaks of rain that'll be heavy, breezy, especially for exposed coasts. There'll be the odd bright spell this afternoon across the Midlands, mostly dry in the west though. Across the east, there'll be scattered showers that may be heavy and thundery. After a mostly dry morning for East Anglia, there'll be some showers across the region this afternoon, and these may turn heavy or even thundery for a time. A mixed picture for southern England with bands of heavy rain across the far southwest and a drier afternoon in the east, though there may be the odd heavy shower. Bands of heavy rain continue slowly spreading northeastwards with showers easing this evening across the south and the east, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day. They did not kill me.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 12:31. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce funding for Moscow's war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. A memorial service for Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union's last ever leader, has taken place in Moscow. President Vladimir Putin denied him full state honours and said he was too busy to attend. His coffin went on display in the Hall of Columns, where previous Soviet leaders have also been mourned. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. The UK's medicines regulator has approved an updated booster vaccine made by Pfizer-BioNTech, which targets 2 coronavirus variants. The booster shot has been approved for people aged 12 years and older. The MHRA says the decision was based on data from a clinical trial that showed it triggers a strong immune response against both the original and the Omicron variants of the virus. NASA will try to launch its latest moon rocket again today after a failed attempt earlier this week. The initial launch had to be postponed following a temperature problem in one of the engines. They're now expecting Artemis 1 to lift off at around 7:15 p.m. UK time from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. OK, that's it. We're on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is, of course, GB News. Back to Alastair Stewart and friends right now.
Ray, thank you. When I was an undergraduate at Bristol University back in the 1970s, I used to love to stroll up the hill to Bristol Zoo to chill out and enjoy the animals, especially a gorgeous orangutan. So I was very sad to learn that it's to close after 186 years. But happily, the animals have been found a new home in rural Gloucestershire. Jeff Moody, our South West of England reporter, has the story.
When they first housed animals here, the iconic Clifton Suspension Bridge was less than 5 years old. In nearly 200 years, Bristol Zoo Gardens has welcomed 90 million visitors and helped save 175 species from extinction. It survived 2 world wars, but it can't survive this. The perfect storm of COVID, inflation and rising energy costs has forced the site to close down.
Well, I came as a kid for the first time. I must have been about 8, I think. So our mum used to bring us here once a week. She had an annual zoo pass. So yeah, I'm just kind of reliving those memories.
Yeah, really sad. It's amazing. It's the first time I've ever been here, so I'm really glad that I was able to come before it closed.
Closing down it may be, but it's not disappearing. Bristol Zoological Society has another site a few miles up the road. They've run the 2 sites in tandem for years, but in current climes it's not practical or profitable to continue with both.
So really we took the decision, and the pandemic really forced our hands, to concentrate on one site, and it has to be the Wild Place Project site to really transform and focus and building the new Bristol Zoo on a site where we've got a bit more space, well 10 times the space, and much more flexibility to focus on our conservation and do what we want to do.
Staff have been migrating to the new site for weeks now. The hope is visitors will follow suit. But it's not just the visitors and the staff. the logistics involved in moving so many animals from one part of the county to another is quite frightening. But it's something that zoos up and down the country have been preparing for a very long time.
Some animals are easier, particularly things that are smaller are generally easier. But, you know, some things are much more delicate, you know, so some birds, they have a very high metabolism, so we have to make sure that the transport times are very short. And we do that by investigating all the options in terms of where they get moved and how quickly they're moved to make sure we do it in the right way.
The current 12-acre site is being sold for housing, sustainable living set in beautiful gardens. The sale will fund the development of the new Bristol Zoo, which will be built at the Society's Wild Place project and is due to open in 2024. They say moving house is one of the most stressful things you can do. The hope is, by then, the animals will be firmly ensconced in their new home and ready to be gawped at once more. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Speaking as a former gawper, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Jeff joins me live now. Jeff, fascinating package and a powerful story, but goodness me, Simon Garrett and Brian Zimmerman got it on the money, absolutely, didn't they? In a sense, although it's sad for Bristol, this is terrific news for the animals, for the collection, because they'll have more space, open air, out of the city in Gloucestershire.
Yes, absolutely right. I mean, the new site is 10 times the site of the old building, which I'm standing in front of now. But the accountants may say it's good news, it might be good news, but bricks and mortar hold memories. And people have been flooding here this morning. This is the very last day. The queue's still going on. And ironically, it's been really, really busy over the last few weeks and months as people come to say goodbye to an old friend. There are people that have been going in this morning that have been in tears. And a lot of people remembering someone I'm sure you'll remember too, Alastair. Johnny Morris from the BBC show Animal Magic, who used to base himself here and come up with all these different voices for the animals and really helped to put this place on the map. As you say, after today, the visitors will go away and the building will shut down and the animals will be here for some time. They'll be having a little bit of a rest rather than peering out of their enclosures at other people. But gradually, they're going to be moving across to the new location and that'll all be open and up and running in a couple of years.
Well, brilliant, Jeff. Thank you very much indeed. We wish the animals and everybody involved in that lovely zoo and that project the very best. Thanks for the report and for joining us live today. Jeff Moody there, our southwest of England reporter. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come, including the funeral of Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, taking place today. We'll be speaking to our very own Liam Halligan, who met Gorbachev when he was working in Russia as a reporter. All of that to come, but first, a quick break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 19 minutes to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. The funeral of one of the towering figures of the 20th century, Mikhail Gorbachev, is taking place today. Ironically, whilst he helped reunite a Europe divided by the post-war Iron Curtain, he divided his own country between reformists, people like him, and the old-school communists who, to this day, dream of a greater Mother Russia and her lost empire. But Vladimir Putin says he's too busy to attend. Well, joining me live now in the studio is GB News' economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, certainly a friend of mine, but actually you booked your place on the sofa today because you lived and worked in Moscow, in Russia, for 6 years. You wrote for great organs like The Economist and other people, and you met him several times.
I did meet him several times. I, in particular, covered the 96 presidential election, which is obviously after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. That was the election that saw the reinstatement in power of Boris Yeltsin of what was then had become the Russian Federation. Gorbachev ran in that election, and unfortunately, he humiliated himself. He barely troubled the scorers, to use a cricket analogy. And that really goes to the heart of his legacy. He is revered in the Western world as the man who was seen to have facilitated the collapse of the Soviet Union, ironically, because he actually set out to strengthen the Soviet Union. But he's not revered in Russia. There's still a real ambivalence about him, as reflected in the fact that he isn't going to be buried in the walls of the Kremlin, like most Soviet-era leaders. Like Khrushchev, he is going to be buried in Novodevichy, in a suburb of Russia. Khrushchev has a grave that's been there many times, made out of black and white stone to portray the kind of two sides of him in the eyes of the Russian people, of course, because Khrushchev criticised Stalin famously. And it may be that Gorbachev's monument is similarly dualistic. The Russians love dualism and subtlety. And it's certainly quite a big statement by Putin to say he's too busy to attend the funeral of a leader of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. I've had a couple of minor clashes with people on social media about it because like you, we both covered the Berlin Wall back in '89. And to me, the profound legacy of Mikhail Gorbachev is to be found in countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, now 2 countries in its own right, because they grabbed what he'd offered, Lech Wałęsa in the Polish shipyards in Gdansk, and they ran with openness, glasnost, perestroika, but they did it economically. Those countries are utterly transformed.
So Gorbachev was born in southern Russia in a very small agricultural village called Privolnyye, but Privolnyye is near what was then Stalingrad, which is now Volgograd, the site of the most brutal, pivotal, decisive battle on the Eastern Front. And a young Mikhail Gorbachev, he watched, the burly young men of his village go off to war, and many of them never come back, a few of them coming back maimed and wounded for the rest of their lives. And that instilled in him the fact that he grew up among the Russian narod, the Soviet people who actually had to get on the sharp end of wars. It instilled in him a real aversion to violence his whole life. And that's why, Alastair, unlike Khrushchev in the 50s when the Hungarians revolted, he sent in the tanks. Unlike Brezhnev in the 60s when the Czechoslovakia revolted, he sent in the tanks. Gorbachev didn't send in the tanks when Eastern European countries, which then were behind the Iron Curtain, part of what you and I used to call Comecon, the kind of Soviet Union sphere of influence, he let them secede from Soviet influence, partly because he didn't want to attack them. There was some violence in what was then the Soviet Union and the Baltic states when they tried to revolt under Gorbachev. It was quite short-lived, but it still happened. Yeah. And there'll be people watching this whose relatives died in that. It wasn't that he was completely against violence, but he had a real aversion to violence, given that he was in charge of a dictatorship.
And on the economic front, both Ronnie Reagan and Margaret Thatcher embraced him, which says everything. I can't let you go, because you're kind enough to be in today. I know you've got other stuff to do. The programme today began with an intriguing interview with Dame Ruby McGregor-Smith.
I saw it, yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you did. Wow. I want a plan, and I want it by the close of play on Monday. Otherwise, my sector's going to the wall, and we will have a recession.
Well, I have to say, I've been talking with my guests on this subject on GB News for months and months. The fact that there isn't a price cap on energy for businesses. The big businesses, they are able to hedge their energy. I was just talking to the CEO of JCB, and the interview with him is going to be aired early next week. They use a lot of energy, but they've got a big energy trading desk. They can buy on futures markets. They can buy forward. They can hedge themselves. If you're running a pub or a laundrette or a small factory, you're ringing up the energy provider, you know, with no power, like the rest of us if we've got a household. But at least with households, while the increases are eye-watering, they're within an energy price cap. Businesses are seeing 3, 4, 5, 10-fold increases in their energy bill. And there will be, unless ministers get hold of this, a wave of insolvencies, bankruptcies, and people without work, particularly, Alastair, where the political rubber really hits the road. You have small-scale manufacturers in the UK across the red wall, Midlands, North East and North West seats. If they don't get some kind of assistance, then that's going to be politically very, very damaging for the Tories.
I have a feeling you and I and others may be talking about this Monday evening and Tuesday as well. Liam, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Liam Halligan, our GB News economics and business editor, but also someone who met Mikhail Gorbachev on several occasions when he was working in Moscow and in Russia. Now, each weekend we make no apology for keeping up with what's going on in Ukraine. And today I am delighted once again to be joined by Andriy Usashok, MP of the Golosh Party. And there he is. He always smiles because he knows I can't quite pronounce the name properly, but he forgives me, which is so charming. Live from Ukraine. Great to see you. I have to start with what we've been talking about on the programme up to now, and that is G7 imposing a price cap on Russian oil, Putin switching off the gas. Are you worried that that's going to put the collywobbles across Germany and Greece and France and Italy, and that support for your struggle may decline as folk get cold over winter?
I'm not worried at all, because for us it's too late to be worried. From another side, I'm quite happy that hopefully, finally, everyone in Europe will understand what we were saying during decades, that Russian energy is a weapon. Russian gas is a weapon. And now when finally Russia absolutely intendedly switched off Nord Stream 1 without technological reason, but it is the act of war. You all need to accept one simple reality, that peace and prosperity in Europe is possible only in case of victory in this war. And we all are fighting on one side of the barricade. And Russians now openly attacking everyone in United Kingdom, everyone in European Union, because they're attacking every household with energy crisis. And the only response for that should be full consolidation of the Europe, because any compromise will simply may theoretically give a break for the Putin. He's fighting for the break for the last couple of months because he has a huge problems with the military ammunition. He has a huge problem with the people to fight. So he's looking any options for the break. But this break he will use only for two reasons: to extend manufacturing of weapons and to recruit more people to his army to continue the war. That's very simple reality. So now, yes, we will have to pay the bills for previous mistakes, which has been done in Europe. And yes, Europe maybe will pay for with some dollars or pounds or euros. But again, the highest price is currently still paid by Ukraine, with the daily losses of hundreds of innocent people, innocent kids, and our heroes who are dying daily on the Eastern and South Front.
Talking of which, I didn't want to interrupt that because it was such a crisp and powerful analysis of what we need to think about. But talking of how things are, as it were, on the ground, you talk about the losses at the front. Do you sense at the moment, as we approach winter, that you and your armed forces are in a good place, or are you fighting to defend what you've been able to defend up to now? Are you on the advance or are you on the defensive?
So first of all, you see that for the last almost month, all reports which is coming from Russia is about successful defensive Russian operations. So meaning that even Kremlin is confirming publicly that they are moving, they are not moving anymore. Meaning that we were right when we were asking the West for more heavy weapons, that these heavy weapons is needed to stop Russians in the south and the southeast. Now they are stopped. For the moment, there are two critical issues which may turn around not only this war, but may probably end up the not only ruling, but probably the life of Vladimir Putin, is Kherson and Crimea Bridge. Because I think if we will find the way and resources and bravery to liberalize Kherson, which is on the right bank of the Dnieper and which is in fact now Russian enclave, which do not have enough supplies, it will maybe begin the end of Putin's reputation among his gangsters in Kremlin. The same with Crimea Bridge, which is an icon of Russian propaganda, and it looks that we will have proper missiles from our American allies which can reach this bridge.
Sure.
Meaning that it's not only military target, it's very emotional target which may destroy Russian propaganda. So the bottom line is we stop Russian progress in the south and the southeast, and very likely that we will be able to push them back. The only thing which is stopping us, we value our soldiers. We fight for the life of each of Ukrainian soldier. So that's why we do everything in calm. We're not in hurry at all.
Andriy, message received loud and clear, and thank you very much indeed for finding time for us, as always, and look after yourself, your family and your colleagues. Thank you very much indeed. Andriy Usachok, member of the Ukrainian Parliament and the Golosh Party. Now, total change of subject. Creepy crawlies, or nature's best friend. They are among the marmite creatures of the world. Some, like me, love spiders, clever, artistic and magnificent flycatchers. Others are filled with fear at the very sight of them, especially creeping across the bottom of an empty bath. Well, it seems there could be even more to these remarkable creatures than we thought. New research suggests that they dream, perhaps of a fly-filled world or a land of empty baths to crawl around. So to bust common myths surrounding our eight-legged friends and to help us understand them further, arachnologists, I've never had to say that before, Ray and Angela Hale join me live. Did I get that right? Arachnologists. I know what an arachnophobiac is.
Yeah.
Good. How do we know that they dream?
Well, OK, recent research has suggested that when spiders are at rest, particularly jumping spiders are at rest, that there is a rapid eye movement on the retinas, very similar to humans, and this would suggest that they possibly dream. And they've also noticed that some spiders, when at rest, twitch like a dog or a cat when they're asleep. So there is a suggestion that they could possibly dream. Of course, that would be very difficult to prove either way. And I like to think, whereas humans dream of spiders, perhaps spiders dream of humans. We are much more of a threat to them than they are to us.
Well, as I said in the introduction, I absolutely adore them, not least Angela, because I genuinely see them as artists. And YouTube is full of the most wonderful clips of them constructing not just a flycatcher web, but something that is Leonardo da Vinci standard of beauty and mathematical precision.
Yeah, they're at the top of their game, really. You can tell a spider, or rather, if you look at a web, you can tell what sort of spider it is by the shape,
of spider?
The shape of their web.
You know, because we have to bear in mind there's something like 82,000 different types of spider on the planet. And most of them spin slightly different webs. Some don't spin webs at all, but and just by looking at a spider's web, you can often say what species has made the web.
We're just, people who are listening to the conversation on radio rather than watching on telly, we are looking at a lovely, beautiful web there and looks as if he or she's done quite well already, because in the middle there are a few bits and bobs. But forgive me, Angela and Ray, if this sounds a naive question. How do they... Is it instinctive that they know how not only to make a web, but to make their particular type of web that is peculiar to their species? Or is it a parental instruction thing, like lions and cubs? Do they follow the guidance of mum and dad? How do they get to know what to do?
They seem to just know.
It's a lot of it is instinct.
Yeah,
instinct. I mean, you know, the reality is we have to be careful we don't sort of anthropomorphise spiders. You know, when we see orangutan looking after their young, spiders, 90% of spiders do not care for their young. Once the young are born, they're on their own. And so really from day one, these tiny little spiderlings, as we call them, are on their own. So it's an instinctive thing rather than a taught. And of course, when a spider has 200 babies, it does come down to survival of the fittest.
Absolutely. Final thought, Angela and or Ray, don't mind, but why do they also matter so much to our ecosystem? I understand very loud and clear about bees and pollen and cross-fertilisation, but Angela, why do spiders matter to the ecosystem?
If we didn't have spiders, we would be knee-deep in insects. There are so many insects about, especially with the hot weather. They get rid of mosquitoes. They do such a good job. They get rid of beetles and things that eat the corn. The crops.
So they are in actual fact part of the ecosystem. So if we didn't have spiders, there would be a gap between insects and birds. And so we need those spiders to eat the insects, and they eat a lot of insects, and in turn the birds eat the spiders, and so you will see that they are part of the food chain, and without them, they are our friends, and as I say, without them we would be in serious trouble.
I'm not saying leave all the spiders in your house, but they do a good job.
They do a good job.
All right, well, I'll buy into that, Angela and Ray. Lovely to meet you both. Thank you very much indeed. That's Angela and Ray from Drusilla's Park. Angela and Ray Hale talking about spideys. So look after them, they do matter. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with lots more to come on the second half of the programme. We'll be continuing our conversation about the economy, energy and the leadership race of the Conservative Party, and much more besides. Plus, the Artemis space launch is set to have another go this evening. We'll be discussing that too. But first, coming up to the top of the hour, let's take a quick break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. Hello and thanks for being with us since noon if you have been so kind enough to do so. The time is now 1 minute past 1 and I am Alastair Stewart and we are into the final hour of the programme. We'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion about the state of the economy and who might be the best leadership contender to tackle our economic challenges. We'll hear what you think, but first let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alastair. 1 minute past 1. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce Moscow's ability to fund its war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. Lower gas flows have left European countries struggling to refill storage tanks for winter and could lead to energy rationing. Mikhail Gorbachev's coffin has begun its journey to the Moscow cemetery where he'll be laid to rest. Earlier, a memorial service was held for the Soviet Union's last ever leader. However, President Putin denied him full state honours and said he was too busy to attend. The politician will be buried alongside his wife. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. Grant Shapps says the next PM may decide to keep the scheme running.
That will be up to them how they prioritise funding. And I think, to be fair, they'll want to see how this actually works. Does it attract people to the buses? Does the simplicity of knowing that you'll never pay more than £2 for your bus fare for a single journey help attract people back to the buses? I think it will. But it would be great to be able to collect the data and then for decisions to be made from there. In the meantime, people know headed into the winter that this is a bit of real cost of living help.
Staying with transport, and Avanti West Coast's managing director has stepped down following a backlash over timetable cuts. The rail firm says Phil Whittingham will leave on the 15th of September. That's the same day that new train strikes will take place. The company currently operates a significantly reduced service due to staffing issues, with only 1 train an hour between London and Manchester. Police are investigating how protesters were able to gain access to the House of Commons chamber yesterday. Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves around the Speaker's chair. They draped banners on the Palace of Westminster and padlocked themselves by the neck to railings. 8 people were arrested during the security breach. Leader of the House of Commons, Mark Spencer, says protests like this can actually harm democracy.
These types of protests in these locations will put further barriers between our constituents and the MPs, and I think that's unhealthy for our democracy, and it's unhelpful to MPs.
NASA will try to launch its latest moon rocket again today following a failed attempt earlier this week. The initial launch had to be postponed due to a temperature problem in one of the engines. They're now expecting Artemis 1 to lift off at around 7:15 p.m. UK time from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The energy crisis is forcing manufacturers to consider cutting production or closing down altogether, according to new research. Trade association Make UK, which represents manufacturers, says half of firms surveyed have seen their electricity bills shoot up by more than 100% in the last 12 months. Around 1 in 8 have already made job cuts as a result of increased energy prices. Over 1.6 million care home residents, staff and housebound people in England can receive their autumn coronavirus vaccine booster from Monday. NHS England says health teams will visit care homes and private residences in the latest phase of the vaccine rollout. It will then be expanded to involve 26 million people over the coming weeks, including the over 50s. Well, the UK's medicines regulator has approved an updated booster vaccine made by Pfizer-BioNTech, which targets 2 coronavirus variants. The booster shot has been approved for people aged 12 years and older. The MHRA says the decision was based on data from a clinical trial that showed it triggers a strong immune response against both the original and Omicron variants of the virus. Thousands of new emergency beds will be given to shelters as part of the government scheme to end rough sleeping in England. The 3-year plan, costing £2 billion, will see 14,000 new beds introduced over the next 3 years. Over 2,000 supported homes for those with the most complex needs will also be delivered by March 2025. The International Atomic Energy Agency says the damage that's been done to Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is unacceptable. It's currently inspecting the facility, which has been under the control of Russian forces since March. 2 members of the watchdog will stay there long term. A full safety report will be published early next week. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. It's going to be a tough gig for whoever wins the Conservative leadership race on Monday. The incoming Prime Minister will have a full intro from day one. First port of call, what will they do to help the nation navigate through the impending economic crisis? A call live on this programme an hour ago from the President of the British Chambers of Commerce. I want a battle plan and I want it by the close of play on Monday. How can any incoming Prime Minister turn the ship round and make it a better, brighter, Great Britain for all of us? We want to know what you think. Do keep your views coming in. We are at GBViews at gbnews.uk, and we're also on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and all of the rest of it. Going to carry on the conversation now with some people who were here earlier on and some new friends, including my old friend Peter, now Lord Lilly, the former Trade Minister, former Shadow Chancellor, and of course himself, former Conservative Member of Parliament. Peter, we don't have long to wait, but is either leadership candidate, in your experienced view, up to dealing with the challenges so graphically described by Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, who sits with you in the House of Lords?
Well, they've got to be. Whoever becomes Prime Minister has got to be up to the job. Ideally, either of them would have had more years of experience, but that's not something we can legislate for retrospectively. They're there. Let's hope that they can be up to it. They've got a huge challenge and immense problems and numerous problems in their inboxes.
The government led by Margaret Thatcher, who certainly started fresh, something that was completely and profoundly different, not only for her own party, but for the way we did stuff in the United Kingdom. Are we looking at such a moment down the barrel of a gun, as I said to Freddie and Hamish earlier on? Now's the time to do something profoundly different, and that might just mean Truss.
Yes, well, all the votes are close, so it doesn't really matter what we decide it should be. It obviously will be Liz Truss. She has put forward some radical proposals. She's got a more radical approach, but I in the end, actually voted for Rishi Sunak. My wife voted for Liz Truss, so we cancelled each other out. And, you know, it was pretty much 51-49 as far as I was concerned. It's going to be Liz Truss. She has had a willingness to consider radical options. Let's hope she does. But it's important that she be just systematic about it. We've had too much government by the latest opinion poll or the latest headline, rather than thinking, I've got these problems, I've got to come up with immediate solutions and long-term solutions. That's the way Mrs. Thatcher approached it. She didn't say what's going to sound good in the opinion polls tomorrow or get a good headline the day after. They've only got 2 years up until a general election, but the electorate will reward them if they're seen to be governing, or whoever it is seen to be governing in an effective way rather than just a responsive way.
Sure. The other thing, and this is my final point to you, Peter, I'm going to play you a couple of clips, is that crucial point that Margaret Thatcher argued for and embraced, and that is this, that there are limits to the size of the state. There should be limits to the ambition of what the state can do. And the answer isn't always simply to chuck money at it and chuck money at it. I put precisely that point to both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss when I hosted the Manchester hustings, whenever it was, a week or so back. And I'm going to play to you and my guest in the studio what they both said. So first up, I think, if I remember rightly, is Rishi and then Liz afterwards. How big should the state be? Is that something that your party and the rest of us now need to debate? Here's what they had to say, Peter.
Government can't do everything, but more than that, government shouldn't do everything. We are Conservatives. We believe in personal responsibility. We believe in families. We believe in communities. And yes, COVID happened, but that is not the norm. We've got to be willing to actually just make the argument, because all the pressure is always there. And as that's what you've seen over the last 2 years, that's not me. I don't wake up every morning and when a problem comes my way think, oh, well, how can the government spend some money to solve this problem? That is wrong. That's not what a Conservative government should do, and that is not what I will do as Prime Minister.
So my long-term vision is for the state to take a smaller proportion of GDP, but the way we get to that is by unleashing growth and doing all the things like the post-Brexit reforms, speeding up infrastructure projects, having low-tax investment zones. That is the way we get to a higher growth country. And ultimately, yes, the government sector will be a smaller proportion of that.
Peter, that's both of them on the money, and I think we could all of us done with a lot more of that during the campaign. Do you not agree?
Yes, though, of course, it's easy to say in general you want state to take less without spelling out where it's going to take less and where you're going to be leave it to people's individual responsibility and the private sector to cope. That's always the difficult issue. And you don't radically in government say suddenly we're going to withdraw from a whole sector of the economy, but you can resist temptation constantly to encroach and look at some recent decisions and see whether they can be reviewed. I put forward some proposals for funding an element of social care in old age that would take it off the taxpayer in the long term and put it more on the homeowner. But I hope they will look at that again, because we can't afford to take on new responsibilities for the state, for the taxpayer, at a time when taxation has already reached the highest proportion of national income since the Attlee government.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Lilly there. I'm now going to turn to the guests who are in the studio. And I'm delighted to welcome to the programme for the first time, sitting in the middle between the two lovely guys who were here earlier on, a very good friend of mine, Caroline Dinenage. We've known each other for far too long, down in Hampshire, as it were. But you're here as a former minister. You're here as a Conservative Member of Parliament who cast her vote in the leadership election, waiting to hear who the new leader of your party is and who the new Prime Minister is. Deep breath. It's up to your generation of Tories to take on board what both of them have said about the size of the state and where we're going. Otherwise, it's hell in a handcart, isn't it?
I absolutely agree. I think both of them hit the nail on the head, didn't they? And I think I would love to tell you that MPs across the Conservative Party will start next term on Monday with a renewed sense of optimism and vigour. But the fact is, we realise that we've got some serious issues that we have to deal with. Literally from the very first moment, we have whoever wins that role on Monday has to hit the ground running, and they have to do so with enormous bravery. Because from what both Rishi and Liz said, they both advocate a smaller state, but we're in a mindset as a country where the government has had to step in and has had to throw an awful lot of money at a situation, and people have gotten used to that. I see it in my mailbag from.
Well, you and I often exchange messages on social media, and I watch very closely what you do, and another Chumpeny Mordaunt down the road in Portsmouth. And you're always going out into Gosport. You're talking about your supporters, ordinary men and women within that great town. But you also talk to the small businesses. Dame Ruby, an hour and 10 minutes ago, said unless that government on Monday hits the ground running, by close of play on Monday with a plan, businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises that you cherish are going to fall over like a deck of cards.
Yeah.
Are you sensing that in Gosport?
I am sensing that. I have a lot of respect for Ruby. I was Minister for Women and Equalities when she was the chair of the Women's Business Council, so I've worked alongside her very closely. A lot of respect. I am sensing fear from small businesses in my constituency. I can't tell you the number of them that have contacted me over the last few weeks, expressing the very real belief that they will not be able to survive the winter if things go as predicted.
Yeah. Peter, in what was almost a throwaway line, but as is so often the case with Peter Lilly, it was a killer line. I wish either of them had a little more experience. Dissing Rishi, who was a chancellor. Yeah, you got that one as well. And Liz, who's been number 2 at the Treasury, been Foreign Secretary and the rest of it. You know these people, all of them, very well. Forget Liz and Rishi just for a moment. You've been a minister. It's the second and third tier that matters just as much. It's the business secretary, it's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but it's also somebody who might be the Minister of State for Levelling Up and so on and so forth. I don't expect you to shoot yourself in the foot because you're too clever for that. But is there a sense of confidence within the parliamentary party that Liz or Rishi, probably Liz, has pretty good people to choose from, or I wish he or she would come back?
I think there's a huge pool of talent out there. I think both candidates now need to think very carefully about who they need to surround themselves with. And I don't just mean in terms of a ministerial team. I mean at the heart of number 10 as well. For far too long, I've been concerned every time I've walked into number 10. There are lots of very, very young, very bright, very young people who have brains the size of a planet, but very little real-life experience. And now it's time to bring in the adults.
I've noticed your head going, Freddie Gray.
Yeah, agreeing with everything Caroline's saying.
Ms. Dinage on the money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly, you know, the teams in number 10, as you say, very, very bright kids, very ambitious kids often. And I could call them, I mean, I'm 42 and I think of them as kids that sort of inexperienced. But I think going back to the shrinking the state, Tories love talking about shrinking the state. It's very easy to talk about, it's harder to do. And the fundamental problem is, of course, energy. And I think any modern economy now, the state has to be able to provide affordable energy. And if it can't do that, then it has to take whatever measures necessary to do it, because otherwise the entire economy will collapse.
But if you go down that road, and you and I talked about with Freddie as well earlier on, if you go down that road, i.e. the state has to keep expanding until we get to the other side of the energy crisis, with people writing erudite articles right now saying it's going to go on for another year at least, and we're going to have to learn to live with that, then if he's right, we are stuck. I mean, with what Rishi warned about in his May's lecture. Post-coronavirus levels of spending and size of the state must not become the new norm, or we're all dead. Economically.
I see this in very practical terms. You've had governments have always tried, they tended to nudge up tax revenues because you get pressure to spend. Every time they get above about 35% of GDP, Gordon Brown tried it, 35 plus a bit more other revenue, say 37, 38. They get squashed back. And Rishi Sunak tried to push up the tax take to the highest level since 1948. Got pushed back. Something always comes along and crunches you back down. So you've got that amount of money coming in the long run. You can spend a bit more for 1 or 2 years, but you can't do it forever. And so therefore, that is the reality of every government, be it the present lot or the other lot if they get in. That's the money you've got to play with. And I think all governments have to learn that's what we work with.
Yeah.
And we try and do well within that. In the short term, sure, we can do something, as we did with the coronavirus thing. You can spend more money. If you have a war, you spend much more money. But you've got to keep coming back to that basic level. That is the amount of tax British people will pay.
Sure. And Caroline, again, it's a variant on a question I put to you earlier on, but bearing in mind and I noticed you were listening very closely to what Hamish said there, with the polls for the first time in quite a while suggesting that folk out there whatever party they may or may not be a member of, but just ordinary voters, are for the first time now consistently suggesting in the polls that they do trust Labour with the economy, and that Hamish McRae, they're not predicting one way or the other, but saying if that's the judgment of ordinary folk, that we can take a risk now with having a go of Labour, which we haven't had for over a decade, the parliamentary party need to get that and need to get it PDQ.
They do. They need to. We need to really pull this together, and the whole party needs to get behind this, get with the picture, and push this forward, because so much is at stake. You know, you're right. You know, people who don't normally vote Labour are now considering it, and desperate times call for desperate measures, right? But this Conservative Party, the Conservative Party, is the most successful political party in the world in history for a reason, and the reason is that they are able to change. They are able to reflect what's going on in the country, and they're able to adjust to that.
Occasionally, final point to all of you, and I'll probably go Freddie, Hamish, and then finally you, so because you're a friend, I'll give you time to think it through now. Occasionally, your great party needs a period in opposition. It needs it. Not that the electors decide, well, we've had enough of you and we'll chop and change and what have you. Those of us who've studied these things can remember the 60s and the rest of it. But when Blair came along, it took your party a decade to decide where it really wanted to go via a series of different leaders. Do you think that the Conservative Party, in its best interests, needs a period in opposition and a period of reflection?
I'm afraid I do, I think. I think it's become sclerotic. I think that the ideas on the economy are limited. I think this leadership debate has shown how limited the thinking within the party is. So I think a period in opposition, well, I don't want a Labour government. Personally, I don't want a Labour government. I think it's probably necessary for the party. And also, you know, the sooner the better in terms of the state of the economy, if the Tories want to get back in sooner.
Yeah. And fascinating, before I come across to Hamish, within that leadership election, there were a couple of very radical thinkers, people like Kemi Badenoch, but talking about the social agenda, gender issues and stuff like that, there was very little that was profound and fundamental and radical on the economy.
Well, no, and I mean, I thought it was interesting, you know, candidates like Kemi Badenoch got a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and for good reasons, but also no real scrutiny either. And I think the process would have been much better if there'd been more candidates having more scrutiny for longer, and not this sort of, you know, 5-week period of two people saying exactly the same thing over and over again. Apart from your excellent hustings, where you got them to say some interesting stuff, but otherwise it was a sort of barren desert of a debate. Yeah,
well, I heard Rishi himself say the other day that one of the other things, whatever happens, is that we need to look at how we resolve these matters in future going forward. One step back, Hamish, same question to you as an economic and political analyst. Do you believe that we've got to that moment now where the Conservative Party would actually benefit from a period in opposition?
Do you know, I don't have a view on that. There are other people who are much closer to that than I am. I think I voted for all major parties in roughly equal proportions, so I'm not political. What I want is competence. I want calm competence. I want the whole thing to be detuned so that there are lots of small things that need to be done, and those small things may, in 10 or 20 years' time, prove really important. Had we actually looked at energy policy and said, we'll go for security, it cost a bit more, that would have been really good now. We've done one or two things well, for example, pension enrolment, auto-enrolment. Now, in 30 years' time, a lot of people have better pensions because that seemed to be quite small change took place now. So I just want calm and I want competence. And I don't think I mind who actually gives it to us.
Caroline, I'd nevertheless ask you the question, although I don't expect you either to shoot yourself in the foot or indeed any colleagues, but we know each other well enough for you to know that I'm asking it as a sensible question. Thatcher evolved fantastically radical policies in the late 70s after a period of opposition. Dave Cameron went in a different direction and was much more pro the green agenda and stuff like that after a period in opposition. Do parties sometimes need to take a break, take a rain check?
Well, parties do, but I don't think we're at that point just yet. The thing is, leave aside Brexit, over the last few years, every government in Europe and beyond actually has faced one catastrophe after another. A global pandemic, a war on the edge of Europe, energy crisis. We're not in normal times, and it's not a normal time for normal government. Where I 100% agree with Freddie is that this leadership battle has been unbelievably long and very, very unhelpful. And so we're now at a very crucial point where more than ever actions will need to speak louder than words.
Yeah. Is there also, Caroline, a concern? Peter, in his contribution earlier on, mentioned that he'd come up with proposals about long-term care for the elderly. Again, an issue I know that you are intimately involved in and concerned with. Hamish there talking about pensions and things like that. We have a shared interest in schools and education and the rest of it. All that good stuff and important stuff's getting squeezed out.
Well, I mean, it has over the last couple of years because of all the catastrophes that the government has had to the firefighting the government's had to do one after the other. I mean, I think we do need to get back to that. We do need to look at some of that social agenda. As you say, some of these issues are absolutely burning. The adult social care issue was critical. It was mission critical. When I was the care minister back from 2018 to 2020, time was not on our side. No. But the absolute priority, of course, is to get the economy under control and get energy prices under control.
Final thought to you, having started there, and it is that I repeat something I've said to all of you. Therefore, the second and third tier really does matter, and that's where people like the Kemmies of this world and the Tom Tugendhats and the Penny Mordaunt's can come in, maybe higher for some of them as well. But you can get radical thinking, not only from the top, but across the depth and range of a government.
Certainly. And I mean, it would be great if there are people making those smaller decisions that really make big differences on things like social care, schooling, health is going to be a huge issue this winter. My worry is we're in a sort of period of crisis-nomics all over the world. It's in Europe. America's maybe looking a little bit healthier. But that governments now just sort of go on from crisis to crisis to crisis. And the fundamentals of government don't get done because all the attention is sort of sapped by the overwhelming crisis of the day.
Right. I really hope that helped folk at home get a grip of what's going on here in the economy and the Tory leadership. Caroline, I'm delighted you've been able to come in, and I asked the team to whisper in your ear before you depart to book you again where I really want to do a one-by-one interview with you as well, because I want to talk about the social issues and I want to talk about gospel and kids and schools, because, as I say, we've talked about that many times. I want to share it with them at home. But for the time being, thank you so much. Have a great university reuni this afternoon, but thanks for coming via us. Really appreciate it. Hamish and Freddie, it is always a pleasure. Fine double act anytime.
Great pleasure.
And we'll see you all again. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So, Caroline Dinage there, Gosport Member of Parliament, Freddie Gray, Deputy Editor of The Spectator, and Hamish McRae, Independent and Mail guru on matters economic, and he said not really politics. He's having me on and having you on. Plenty more still to come this afternoon in the remaining half hour of Alastair Stewart and Friends. To mark Boris Johnson's last weekend in office, we'll be taking a look back at his legacy. And what do you think he'll be remembered for? Do stay with us. But first, time for a quick break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Almost exactly 1:31. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Russia says it's keeping its Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline closed after finding a fault during maintenance. It comes just a day after G7 countries, including the UK, agreed to put a price cap on Russian oil exports to reduce funding for Moscow's war in Ukraine. Russia has blamed sanctions for hampering operations. However, Brussels says they're using gas as an economic weapon. Mikhail Gorbachev's coffin has begun its journey to the Moscow cemetery, where he'll be laid to rest. Earlier, a memorial service was held for the Soviet Union's last-ever leader. However, President Putin denied him full state honours and said he was too busy to attend. The politician will be buried alongside his wife. Bus journeys in England will be capped at £2 from January to help families struggling with the rising cost of living. The Department for Transport says the scheme could see some passengers save more than £3 per ticket. The cuts, which were announced by the Transport Secretary, will run for 3 months until the end of March. The UK's medicines regulator has approved an updated booster vaccine made by Pfizer-BioNTech, which targets 2 coronavirus variants. The booster shot has been approved for people aged 12 years and older. The MHRA says the decision was based on data from a clinical trial showing it triggers a strong immune response against both the original and Omicron variants of the virus. And NASA's attempt to launch its Artemis 1 moon rocket has hit another hitch due to a hydrogen leak, which now appears to be fixed. It follows a failed attempt earlier this week, with liftoff postponed due to a temperature problem in one of the engines. Launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida is scheduled for around 7:15 p.m. UK time. On TV, online and on DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Back to Alastair right now.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. You've been getting in touch on our big topic of the day, the British economy and energy. Let's cut straight in with some of them. Joe says, I've seen a few energy quotes for businesses going round. If these are true figures, as you can never tell with Twitter, very fair point, some are going up 10 times. I know there is no energy price cap for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, but if companies are passing what they can't charge domestic customers, this cannot be right. Rory says hospitality, especially, is facing an extinction-level event. Some of the demands look like the energy companies are having a laugh, though. Like many others, I've had a demand from my energy company to double my direct debit, despite being in credit and paying 2/3 of their demand in April. And Rory, I'd just point out, it's not only small companies that are going up. My son was telling me about him facing exactly the same problem, although he's been in credit for months. And finally, a thought from Steve. SMEs need support to manage rising energy costs, much the same as the public. Well, that was the point Dame Ruby made right at the very beginning of the programme. But they are customers too and will face rising costs of materials while struggling to pay their workers, who in turn will be struggling. We risk losing so much innovation and entrepreneurship. A brilliant observation there, Steve, and thank you very much indeed. Thanks, all of you. If we've got time before the end of the show, with, 25 minutes to go, we'll get some more out there as well. So do keep your views coming in. And also you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at GB News in case you've missed any of the earlier interviews. And if I may say so myself, I think they were all brilliant today and well worth listening to and reflecting upon. Now, Britain's pothole problems are getting worse as the cost of fixing roads keeps going up. Councils in England have seen the price of a pothole repair jump by 22%. The war in Ukraine and international supply chain issues mean that some potholes are predicted to take 6 months or longer to fix. A problem? Yeah. You wait until you drive over one and then have to pay for new tyres, etc., etc. So we sent our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis to find out to look for the nation's famous No, we didn't. Start again. We sent him out with the nation's most famous pothole campaigner, Mr. Pothole himself. Here's the report.
There's at least 12 potholes in that short section of road. So it's a perfect example. You don't have to travel that far.
In Brackley, Northamptonshire, the life of a pothole is always at risk of being shortened. Mark, aka Mr. Pothole, has become a menace for local councils, but a hero for Britain's roads and its users.
I mean, these have been marked up by the local council, but in reality, with their intervention criteria, it'll be up to 6 months before they actually get repaired. But in that time, they will get worse. If they get worse, and I monitor it, I will chase them because they become a danger.
He's spent the last decade of his life campaigning for road repairs, but now he's needed more than ever. The rising price of fixing a pothole is soaring, and as a result, fewer are being filled. 2 hours away in Lincolnshire, this hole hasn't escaped its fate. From the fuel in the tools to the black bits of bitumen, everything costs more. Before the war in Ukraine, many materials came from Russia, and now global supplies are squeezed. This pothole here in Grantham isn't going to be a problem for locals anymore, but the price of fixing it for councils like Lincolnshire is going to continue to cause difficulties because the exponential increase is almost unbearable. Fuel's up 135%, tarmac a 65% increase, bitumen rising by 30%, and on average, a pothole repair costing up to 22% more. Some local authorities are rationing supplies. Lincolnshire County Council says it has to prioritise jobs.
Fundamentally, it's a function of spend. Without the money to spend on the materials, on the labour, on the fuel to move everybody around, we're going to really struggle to keep on top of the potholes.
The Local Government Association represents councils in England and Wales. It says a £400 million cut to the government's yearly road maintenance budget has already put councils under pressure. Councillor Reynolds says more cash is needed for authorities to function.
Given the increasing costs of both the materials and energy and other inflationary costs, that this poses an additional pressure on local councils when they're already very short of resources to carry out other statutory duties.
A Department for Transport spokesperson says the government is providing over £5 billion of investment over Parliament for highways in England, and that this is enough to fill millions of potholes a year. Back in Brackley, Mark's on to the next job. Being Mr. Pothole has become part of his identity. But a total rethink of road repairs is his dream ending for Britain's pothole nightmare.
Repairing potholes is a waste of money. You're better off to renew the asset itself properly and have a long-term plan. Governments have not really woken up to that.
Will Hollis for GB News in the East Midlands.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. And as I said, if you ever do drive over one, it can be very expensive and very horrible. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in the final 22 minutes of this programme, including it's take two for the launch of NASA's new moon rocket, Artemis 1, today, after the first attempt failed. We will have more on that after this break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Hey,
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, and it's 20 minutes to 2. Now, it's been more than 50 years since man first reached the moon, and now NASA are launching a new moon rocket, Artemis 1, expected to take off at precisely 7:17 this evening, British time. It comes after a failed first attempt to launch on Monday, so will it be successful this time? Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me live now from Florida is the manager of the Orion European Service Module Programme, Philippe Delou. Philippe, thank you so much for joining us on what must be a very hectic period, because you've been involved in the launch operations. How is it looking now with 4 or 5 hours to go?
Good afternoon. It's looking good. It's looking very good. The weather is with us today. We have started the pre-launch operation. There's been a small hiccups in the loading of the liquid hydrogen. The QD was suspecting to leak, but the team has worked this out and has recovered the loading operation to its nominal pace. So we have good hope that it will go this time.
Yeah. So the fuel loading was one of two problems back on Monday. The other was the temperature of one of the 4 main engines, not the 2 boosters, but one of the main engines. Has that problem now been totally resolved, or are you still keeping an eye on it?
It's been resolved in the sense that the team had the impression that the engine 3 was not cooled properly. This was due to a sensor which was not reliable. After the failed attempt on Monday, they analyzed the cooling of the engine based on other data and then concluded that this sensor had to be disregarded for this launch attempt, and the cooling of the engine 3 had to be based on this other data. So yes, it is resolved, and this should not be an issue this time.
I'm delighted to hear that, because I was on tenterhooks. I was on air on Monday hoping that it would all happen and had my lineup of experts, but of course we didn't know what the issue was. You've now explained it beautifully and succinctly there. I'm going to ask you to do something else, Philippe, as well, and that is to explain to me and everybody listening to our conversation why Artemis should matter to this generation. I remember the first launches. I remember seeing Neil Armstrong step on the moon and how exciting that was. Why should my children be equally excited about Artemis?
Because Artemis is the first flight, or the whole Artemis program will be the flight starting a new era for the exploration. So far, we've been to low Earth orbit with the space station. Now we're going beyond to low Earth orbit. We're going back to the moon, not for the same purposes as our predecessor went in the 1960s and 70s, but we are going there in a sustainable manner to explore on the moon, to understand the genesis of our solar system, because the moon is a repository of that history, and also to use the moon as a basis to go further in the solar system and to Mars.
Yeah, and while you were answering that question, Philippe, we were showing people who were watching our conversation on television rather than listening to it on radio, because we have both, fortunately. But we were showing a mock-up of a moon base, which I understood about exploration and even searching for minerals and the rest of it. But you just said it may be an important factor as well if we choose to go further, Mars, for example. So the moon could become a kind of a launch pad in itself as well as a base for scientific research.
Possibly, this is not yet decided. But even if it doesn't come a launch pad to Mars, it could be useful to demonstrate that if we can live on the moon, then we are confident that we could live also on Mars. So it would be a test base. And secondly, the idea is also to exploit resources on the moon in order to fuel the rockets that will go to Mars. This is at the moment a bit science fiction, but this is the idea.
But as we look at that moon base mock-up there, if it was all good enough for H.G. Wells and people like that, it's good enough for me as well. I'm absolutely hooked on it. The other thing that has changed so fundamentally, and it makes you the perfect guest, Philippe, is that back in the 1960s, that was pretty well exclusively a United States of America exercise. Of course, there were some small bits of business and supply chains, but the Americans did it. Jack Kennedy said it. We do it because it's difficult, not because it's easy. And America and America's taxpayers did it. Now there you sit as a European, collaborating, cooperating with NASA, and in the wings you've got Mr. Branson, you've got Mr. Bezos, and you've got Mr. Musk, the private sector as well. This is genuinely a whole new world of space exploration.
Yes, it is. It's a whole, let's say, exploring beyond Earth's orbit is difficult, is expensive, and you cannot do on your own. And the Americans have that, they understood that very well. And 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when we started the program, they contacted us and they wanted to make sure this was an international endeavor for the stability of the program. And yes, also the private sector now is involved and will be complementary and helping to achieve the goals.
Fascinating. Philippe, I'm asking the director just to hold the image that folk at home who are watching on television can see. And I'll just explain to folk listening on the radio that on the left half of your screen is my lovely guest, Philippe Delou. On the right of your screen is there it is, the mighty Artemis rocket. Final question for a complete ignoramus like me, Philippe. Why does this baby need booster rockets as well as the 4 huge ones like the Atlas had? Why does it need so much more power to get up there and do the job of work? Have we lost Philippe?
You need power. You need velocity. The capsule, the launch adapter, etc., is quite heavy. And the boosters give you an enormous amount of thrust at liftoff.
Fascinating. Well, we also, on the picture that we showed, it was countdown just now under 5 hours, which fits in with the pattern. We wish you luck. You can probably do without any more people like me talking to you on television and radio about it all, because you have work to do. But Philippe Delou, thank you so much for breaking into that busy schedule to cast so much fascinating light on what hopefully will happen at 17 minutes past 7 UK time. Very good to talk to you, Philippe. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
That was the manager of the Orion European Service Module programme, Philippe Delou. So, the end of the Johnson era is upon us. On Monday, we will find out who will replace him as Prime Minister. So we thought we'd take a deep breath and look at Boris Johnson's legacy. We then took an even deeper breath and asked Tom Bower, author of Boris Johnson, The Gambler, to join me. And he said yes. So joining me over the phone now, I'm delighted to say, is Tom Bower. And I'm sorry we couldn't sort out the picture line, but can you hear me all right, Tom?
I hear you very well. You're fine.
Excellent. I'm going to start off with a sort of fairly blunt question. Reading your book, you're not actually terribly keen on the bloke himself, and yet ordinary folk do. Isn't that the kind of magic and mystery of politics and of Boris Johnson?
Well, I gave him a fair crack. I think that the disappointment with Boris Johnson is that he was a terrifically successful mayor of London, and I thought he'd carry on that success when he became Prime Minister. And unfortunately, he failed to do that. And so what's really happened is he's betrayed a lot of people who had great hopes for him, and I should think he's disappointed himself and that he's been kicked out.
But as you were saying that, Tom, we're showing pictures to folk at home of him greeting Zelensky, which he did so many times in Kiev and within Ukraine. And also, everyone listening to this conversation will remember that for so long, 18 months, nearly 2 years, whatever he was trying to do was disrupted by COVID. You and I know better than most that luck matters in politics, and he may have had an 80-seat majority, but he didn't have a lot of luck. Have we still got Tom? I have a dreadful feeling talking about luck that mine has just run out. If we have, I'm going to try it once more, and then Tom, can you hear me? No, OK. I think that we have a problem. Forgive me if you're... No, OK. We have 6 minutes of the programme left, and so he's gone, and alas, we can't return to it. So I apologise for that, but Tom Bower, who at least got a start there, who said he was a very successful mayor of London, agreed. He's calling back in now, I'm being told, so we'll get back to him if we can before we come off air at 2 o'clock. Tom, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Brilliant. In case we fall off again, my question was, he may have been a great mayor of London, agreed on that score. He may have had an 80-seat majority, but with Ukraine and with coronavirus, he didn't have a lot of luck. He was somewhat distracted by two big issues, both of which many feel he had a fair crack at.
Well, I think that his problem is he didn't create his own luck. What he failed to do was to arrive in Downing Street with a good team. And without a good team, he could do nothing. And he also had, unfortunately, a wife that didn't help him overcome all the hurdles of being Prime Minister. And I think that his appointment and continuation with Dominic Cummings was, in the end, a poisoned chalice. But the real problem is that Carrie, COVID and character, in the end, undid him. And he made a terrible mistake of lying about Partygate and then about Chris Pincher. And if he'd had very strong support staff around him, he would have been able to manage the crises. But he just didn't have them. He didn't appoint the right people. And that was, unfortunately, part of his downfall.
All right, I'm going to say something blunt because we're on air and it's live television, but I'm going to remain neutral on the Carrie issue because she happens to be a friend of mine. But I hear what you say and everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But I'll put something to you, Tom, which is fascinating. Earlier on, I had Freddie Gray from The Spectator and Hamish McRae from the Mail and The Independent on the programme, and they both said his biggest single problem were the bright young things, the masters and mistresses of the universe who surrounded him in Downing Street. It was they as much as anyone or anything that let him down. He may have appointed them, but they were the ones who screwed up more than he himself.
Well, I don't agree with that at all. He had to make the appointment, and he should have chosen very serious people. But instead he chose people who were not going to really help him. And unfortunately, he relied too much on Carrie's advice, and that in the end was bad advice.
Final point. Looking at what will happen at about 12:30 when Sir Graham Brady gets out there and opens his little envelope like Bruce Forsyth or Michael Miles, the Quiz Inquisitor. As an author and a famed biographer, who would you prefer to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss?
Well, I say it with much reservation, but I think in the end it's got to be Truss because she is experienced, and I don't think Sunak is a campaigning politician. I think Truss has shown herself to be far more wily, and I think she's got 4 weeks to prove herself. She's got a honeymoon, and she's got to hit the ground running and show that she can change all the atmosphere, the bad atmosphere around Boris's government.
A fascinating point to end on, Tom, and there I'm afraid we must end it. But Lady Ruby McGregor-Smith at the beginning of the programme said she actually had 12 hours. She wants to know what the game plan to save British industry is by the close of play on Monday. Tom Bauer, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for finding time. That was Tom Bauer, author of Boris Johnson, The Gambler. And I stand by what I said about Carrie, and he stands by what he says. So there we are. Score draw. That's all that we have time for today. I will be back, however, same time tomorrow for our leadership race special. We've invited grassroots Conservatives back on to give their say. Until then, have a wonderful Saturday afternoon. See you tomorrow.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be rather cloudy with heavy rain in the west and showers in the east. Here are the details. A dry afternoon for north-east Scotland with sunny spells, though bands of heavy rain will slowly spread north-eastwards this afternoon. A windy day, especially for exposed coasts in the north. A mostly wet and windy afternoon across Northern Ireland with outbreaks of heavy rain pushing north-eastwards, though these will be followed by heavy showers. Northern England will see a mixture of some heavy showers that could be thundery at times and a few sunny spells this afternoon, feeling warm. Across Wales, a mainly dry afternoon in the east with the odd bright or sunny spell. In the west, there'll be outbreaks of rain that'll be heavy, breezy, especially for exposed coasts. There'll be the odd bright spell this afternoon across the Midlands, mostly dry in the west though. Across the east, there'll be scattered showers that may be heavy and